Hi everyone, welcome back to Talks in Class. Thank you so much for joining me for another week. I'm Jenna, your host on this journey. So glad you're here with me today. I hope everybody has had a nice week since we were last together here on the podcast. It's been madness around here, okay? I'm not gonna lie. Things have been crazy. I feel like there's just so much going on, and I won't bore you with too many details because it's really not anything that exciting. It's just like normal life stuff that just happens to be kind of happening all at once. And then, in true Aries/ADD form, I have also decided at this time to reorganize all of my throwback clothes, accessories, basically all of the things that I use for my videos. They are stashed all over my apartment. We have a small space, so I have a cabinet in the living room that has some of the clothes, and then our couch has a chase that has storage underneath it. Half of my clothes are in there. I have stuff under the bed. I have stuff in the closet. I mean, there's just stuff kind of piecemeal all over the apartment, and it's just getting to the point where I can't find things when I'm looking for them. So I've decided to take on this project right now when I'm complaining about being too busy and stretched thin. So I'm rearranging furniture. I have to buy a couple new furniture pieces like storage cabinets and things like that and moving stuff around. And then I also, speaking of just me being me, I also decided that I think I'm going to try to DIY this cabinet that we have in the living room. I hate this cabinet, and I could buy a new cabinet, but it's like we have this perfectly good cabinet. I just don't like the way that it looks. So I'm going to try to DIY it. I'm going to try to paint it and change the hardware. We'll see how that goes. Anyway, when I say that it is madness, it's self-inflicted. At least a good portion of it is self-inflicted. But the good news is that we have finally, I think, reached true summer here in Los Angeles. Thank goodness. It was a rough go for a while. The May gray and the June gloom are really difficult, but we're finally seeing sun before mid-afternoon. I don't have to bring a jacket everywhere I go anymore, so I'm very thrilled about that. And, it's all good. The sun is out, so I really can't complain. So as always, I will kick it off with my what could happen. And honestly, a lot of good stuff happened this week, but I'll go with kind of a blanket one that kind of covers a few different things. And that is that I finalized 3 big projects this week. So 3 things that I've had in the works for a while that have been kind of consuming a lot of my time and energy. And this just always seems to be how it goes. Like everything either happens all at once or not at all. There's never just a slow trickle, a manageable workflow. It's all or nothing. And just the past couple of weeks or the past few weeks have been kind of an all time. 3 big projects in addition to the podcast and all of my usual content. I try to post every day, if not very close to every day. And just, the regular day-to-day stuff that goes into work it's a lot. And I am truly a one-woman show. So I'm happy to have them finalized. It's always a good feeling. And now I can breathe a little bit. And for this week's episode, we are talking about something that I think really sets the millennial generation, or even just my specific subset of millennials, people that are my age, kind of that middle millennial, apart from other generations or other age groups just because of the specific time that we grew up in, and that is the evolution of cell phones in the 2000s. When we think about the evolution of technology over the past couple of decades, there are obviously a ton of things that kind of stand out. Our shift away from physical media to everything existing digitally, like literally everything being digital, the quality of our devices and the functions of our devices, from digital cameras to the switch from VHS to DVD and then to Blu-ray and then to streaming ultimately. And of course, one thing that I think about a lot actually is how the advancement of technology has actually made a lot of the technology that I used to swear by completely obsolete. Most of the advancements of cell phones, obviously, because the fact that our cell phones can now perform the functions of pretty much every device, means that we don't need those other devices anymore. And these are things that teenage me would not have been able to fathom living without. Things like a camera, a CD player, or later on an iPod, a video camera even, for those really important moments that needed to be captured on video, which were few and far between, really, just because of the general lack of video recording technology access for most people. I mean, even a computer in a lot of cases, because we can do so many things directly from our phone. You don't necessarily even need a computer for most or a lot of functions. If you would have told 12-year-old me that the camcorder that I loved so much, that I begged my mom to let me use to make cringy home movies during sleepovers, would be entirely obsolete, and not just obsolete, but obsolete because everyone has a video recording device in their pocket at an arm's reach at all times, I wouldn't have believed, I not only wouldn't have believed it, I would have just passed out. I would have thought that that was absolutely mind-blowing. Like, what kind of crazy technological advancements could we possibly be looking at in the future if everybody's carrying around a video camera at all times? But, you know, none of us could have predicted the monumental impact that smartphones would have had on our lives back then. Because back then, a cell phone was literally just that. It was a phone that worked on a cellular network instead of a regular telephone network. It was a device you could use to make phone calls when you weren't at home or you weren't in a place that had a standard telephone connection. And that's what they were used for. They were used for making calls. They weren't used for taking pictures or playing music or posting on social media. I mean, we didn't even have social media. So, you know, I remember when I was a kid, my mom got a car phone. And this was before I had a cell phone. I mean, long before I had a cell phone, before even either one of my parents had a cell phone. It was the late 90s, probably 1997, 1998-ish. And when I say a car phone, I mean a phone that was installed in her car. It was somehow hardwired into the actual vehicle. She had to get it specially installed. And there was this big antenna on the back window of her car, and the phone sat in this big black bag on the center console. It was almost like a camcorder bag. That's what it looked like. And it had the phone in it. It was fairly large. And I think the phone plugged into the cigarette lighter. So when you wanted to use the phone, you had to plug it in so that it had power from that cigarette lighter. And I just remember my 10-year-old mind being blown by this. I mean, it felt so high tech. It felt like a villain in a kid's movie, you know, like the rich man in a kid's movie that was bad, usually had a car phone. It was just crazy to me. And if you're wondering why my mother needed a car phone in rural Wisconsin in the 90s, it was essentially to keep tabs on me, to make sure I wasn't burning the house down. When I was pretty young, my mom got a job about 45 minutes away from where I lived, which was a really long commute for that area, especially at the time. So for years, I had an after-school babysitter. It was two different high school girls over the years, and they would come over and just stay with me from after school until my mom got home. It was just a couple of hours. And then at some point, I think it was 1998 actually, because that's when my second babysitter, my last babysitter, graduated from high school. My mom decided that I didn't need the babysitter anymore. So I would come home from school and I would be there alone from 3:30 or whenever I got home from school until 5 or 5:30 when my mom got home. And this is when I was, 11 years old? Imagine anybody doing this today. I was just left to my own devices, but alas, it was the 90s and this was pretty normal. We just, we had to fend for ourselves. So the routine was that I would get home from school and then either my mom would call me around 3:30 or whenever she knew I was going to get home, or I would call her. Either way, we would touch base in some way so that she would know that I got home from school safely and that I was there, and I would usually bother her with a bunch of questions about like where the ring pops are and, if my friend can stay for dinner or whatever it was. But because she had that long commute, she didn't like the idea of being completely out of touch for that entire, 45 minutes to an hour that it took her to leave her office, get in the car, and drive home. So she got the car phone to keep tabs on me, just in case, God forbid, I started the house on fire or something. I could call her on the car phone and let her know. So I guess it was a safety tool in my mom's eyes, but in my eyes, it was like a toy. It was the coolest, most futuristic thing I had ever seen. And I don't think I was ever allowed to use it because I'm sure it was very expensive to actually make the phone calls, but just seeing it, sometimes I'd pick it up and kind of play with it. We were in the car and pretend like I was talking to somebody. It was very mind-blowing to me. And I guess around this time in the late 90s, I'm sure there were plenty of people who had cell phones. I mean, certainly out in the world beyond my little hometown, but I really don't remember anybody having a cell phone that I personally knew until the early 2000s. Some of my friends' parents or older siblings started to get them around then, like the early 2000s, but they would mostly just sit on the counter at the house, turned completely off, unless they were actually going somewhere where they might need to make a call where there wasn't access to a phone in some other way, and then they would take it with them. But, you know, they didn't take it everywhere they went. If there was another possible way to make a call, the phone usually stayed turned off or even just at home. Unlike now, where the cell phone is basically another, I mean, it's a limb of our bodies. It's permanently attached to everyone's bodies now, and we don't even have landlines. I mean, it would be insane to be out at a business or even at a friend's house and say, can I use your phone to make a call? Because we all have our phones. And as a 1987 baby, I personally got my first cell phone the summer of 2002, which was the summer right after my freshman year of high school. And it was the classic Nokia brick phone, the 3110, I think. That was every single person's starter phone. And if you're around my age, this was also your first cell phone. I'm almost positive of this fact. Or actually, I don't know, maybe you were a little cooler and your parents got you the newer available Nokia phones. You had I think that one was the 3310. It was a little smaller, a little cuter, definitely less bulky. But I had the original clunker of a phone. And I actually still have mine. That is a testament to the durability of these things. They were freaking indestructible. Like this thing, you could throw this in the street and the thing would not break. I mean, I found mine in my mom's garage where it had been sitting since probably, I don't know, 2003. If I had the charger, it would probably turn on and it would stay charged for a week. But, you know, they weighed about 5 pounds, just clunky as hell. And they took up like 85% of the space inside those little shoulder bag purses that were trendy back then, that are also trendy again now. But I never felt cooler than I felt when I got that freaking little phone. I still remember going to US Cellular with my mom to get it. And then she let me go to the little kiosk at the mall to customize it. This is another thing that really stands out to me when I look back at the evolution of technologies. Phones are so boring and homogenous now. Like everybody has basically the same phone. Almost everybody I know has an iPhone. If they don't have an iPhone, they have an Android that looks basically exactly the same as an iPhone unless you're really looking at it super close up. And with minor changes, generation after generation of the iPhone looks pretty much the same. The only novel or different phone that I can really think of right now is that Samsung flip phone. You know, it's like a touchscreen phone, but it folds in half so you can snap it shut like we did back in the day. And I feel like almost all of my friends back in those early days, in those early 2000s days when we were first getting our phones, had one of those Nokia models, either the brick phone or the slightly less bulky, you know, early phone, up until probably about 2003. After that, though, we all had so many different phones. There were so many different varieties. Some people had flip phones. Some people still had the old, you know, regular Nokia phone. Or I remember that there was one phone that had kind of the same basic body as the like cuter, less bulky Nokia phone, but they added a little flip part over the bottom. It probably went over the keypad. I had this really cool LG flip phone. It was my second phone, so I probably got it around 2003. I don't know. But it was super tiny. I wish I still had it. Super tiny. For a while, phones were just getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and that was kind of the status symbol, was how tiny could you have a phone. But it had a little flip that covered the keypad and then a pretty big screen with the little antenna that they all had back in the day. And it was silver with these 2 orange strips on the sides of it next to the screen. And I remember loving that it was colorful. I think that's why I picked it, honestly, was because it had the orange, it had a pop of color on it instead of just being standard silver or black or whatever. And that was without having to buy anything to customize it. That's just how it came. But even before we all started actually getting different phones that kind of looked unique, when we all had our little starter phones, none of them looked alike because we customized those phones as much as humanly possible. We changed out every single piece of the phone to make it our own, to fit our little personality. And it's so cool really to think about how we were able to really do that. I mean, we could customize literally every piece of the phone. And I don't mean like change out the wallpaper. It was the physical phone that we were customizing, which is cool. So the first piece was obviously the face of the phone. And on those early phones, the entire front of the phone would pop right off. Which, I mean, it wasn't like changing the cover of your phone. It was the entire covering of the front of the phone. It would expose the insides of the phone. So you could swap out the faceplates. I had a really cool one I remember with cherries on it that I loved. I don't know what happened to that one, but I do still have my pink chrome one, which pops up in videos from time to time. And I also have the original one that the phone came with, which was sort of like a metallic navy blue. But then you could get really crazy and you could also swap out the little rubber piece that formed the keypad, because when you popped the front of the phone off, that keypad was just like a little piece of rubber that was sitting underneath the faceplate. So you could get clear ones, you could get glittery ones. I'm pretty sure I had a glitter one for a while. The possibilities were endless, okay? And then beyond that, there were the elite customization options. The battery, which would also come completely off of the back of the phone. So you could swap it out for these translucent plastic ones that would blink when the phone rang. I mean, coolest thing ever. And then there was the antenna. You could actually unscrew the little antenna from the top of the phone and also put on a blinking one, which would also blink when your phone rang. So your whole like 5-pound phone that took up half your purse was just going crazy, blinking whenever your phone would ring. And actually, I feel like it was the antenna that would always start blinking right before a call would actually come in, like right before the phone would start ringing. So it was a little cell phone fortune teller, which we thought was very cool. And you have to understand that this was mind-blowing to us at the time because technology wasn't what it is now. It wasn't anywhere near what it is now. These phones were so primitive. I mean, no color screens. I think my first phone still had sort of that green toned screen, actually, like the computers in the computer lab at school and elementary that we used to play Oregon Trail on, like old school. And they didn't do anything, okay? They made calls as long as you had minutes left on your plan and you were in range of a tower. More on that in a minute. They could send text, but texting was cumbersome and it was expensive, okay? Expensive. Honestly, kids today would die if they had to experience texting like we did in the early 2000s because first of all, we did not have full keyboards on our phones. So we had to use T9 or multiple tap texting, which meant that if you wanted to type a K, the letter K, you had to press the 5 button twice because the 5 button was also used for the letters J, K, and L. So if you wanted to type J, you pressed K once. If you wanted to type K, you pressed it twice. If you wanted to type L, you pressed it 3 times. So to type my name on my first cell phone, I would have had to tap 5, 3, 3 again, 6, 6 again, 6, 6 again, and then 2. So 8 button taps to type out my name, Jenna. As you can imagine, this took a while. It wasn't as fast as it is today, but man, once you learned how to do that, it was so fast. I mean, we were freaking pros at texting like this. It was second nature to us after a while. I mean, you didn't even have to look at the keyboard. And this is why so many of us got in trouble for going over our texting limits, because we got charged per text in those days. Can you imagine? I mean, if you were lucky, you had a plan that included some preset number of texts. Like you had to count your text messages to make sure you didn't go over whatever the allotted plan number was. And when I say a number of text messages, I literally mean like the messages came in one at a time, each as their own separate messages. They were not threaded. It wasn't like a conversation on your screen. So if someone sent you a text message that said, "What are you doing?" it would come up like, "Message from Jenna," what are you doing? Almost like an email, like from Jenna, and then the message in like the little body. And then you would reply in a completely separate message that would not show the previous message. So each one stood alone as its own little thing, you know, like a letter that came in the mail. There was no record of the previous correspondence. I didn't text much in the early days of having my phone, probably not until about 2004 that's when I really started using texting, because a lot of my friends' cell phone plans didn't include texting. I mean, the phone plans in those days included a certain number of calling minutes, but texting cost extra. It was like every text message you sent cost 15 cents or something. I don't know what the number was, but you literally got charged per text. And that would add up. So everybody was like, don't text. It was very risky to text someone because you could cost them a big bill. And it just wasn't all that common, you know, it wasn't part of the way that we lived our lives the way that it is now. We still just picked up the phone and called people, or we'd use instant messages on the actual computer, the desktop home family shared computer, because that was the only way that we could access the internet. And actually text messages couldn't even be sent to a different user on a different network, a different cell phone network, until 1999. So if you had a different cell phone provider than me, we could not send each other text messages until 1999. I read a statistic online that said the average number of text messages sent by Americans with cell phones in the year 2000 was 35 a month. 35 text messages a month. And honestly, that even seems a little high for me at that time, but I was also very young. But imagine sending 35 texts in an entire month. So bottom line was, we stuck mostly to calling, but even calling could get you into trouble. And I know this badly from experience, a pretty horrifying experience. First, there was the possibility that you could go over your allotted minutes that were in your plans, because most cell phone plans in those days had a preset number of minutes that you could use every month, and your bill would show how many, talk minutes you used. The trick to getting around this, of course, was to wait until after 9 p.m. when calls were free to call your friends on your cell phone, or just do what I did most often, which was to just use the house phone. I never really used my cell phone when I was home. I think it mostly just sat there on my dresser. I used the house phone. Maybe that's why these old Nokia phone batteries would last a week or whatever without a charge. But in addition to going over your minutes or sending too many text messages, there was also roaming. And roaming was very expensive. So back in those days, cell phones ran on local networks, which required a cell phone tower to work, right? Your phone had to connect to a cell phone tower. And if you weren't able to connect to one of your phone's network towers, your phone would either not work at all, or it would work, but it would be on roaming, and it would show on your screen. It would say roaming, which meant that your phone was connecting to a tower that wasn't your network's tower. It was some other network tower. And I remember that my phone just completely wouldn't work the next town over from me for years. I mean, all through high school for sure. I never had service when I went to that next town over. I just would have to use my friend's phone. And then one town over in the other direction, my phone would work, but it would usually be on roaming. Roaming was a dangerous game because it was basically like the cell phone version of long distance calling. You could make calls, it would work, your phone would work just fine, but it cost a lot of money. And I learned this lesson because I went to Seattle. I lived in Wisconsin, and I went to Seattle the first summer that I had my cell phone, and I took my cell phone with me, and it worked. So I thought I was in the clear, and I spent the entire week calling my friends back home from the little cell phone instead of, making long distance calls from the hotel room, which cost money, or paying for an internet cafe to go online. Do you guys remember internet cafes? That sounds so primitive, but I mean, we didn't have any other way to go online if we weren't at home. So people would pay money to use the internet in a public place in those days. But anyway, as you can guess, I was not in the clear. Capital letters, not in the clear. My mom got the biggest bill from all of those roaming calls that I made. I actually don't even remember what exactly happened. I probably blocked it out of my memory. It wasn't good. I think she actually called the phone company and like worked out something with them because we literally didn't know. Like we didn't know. How would I know? I was 15 years or 14 years old. Unless somebody told us, which nobody did, we just didn't know. This was all brand new. This was uncharted territory for us. So anyway, after that, I think I got a cell phone plan that allowed a certain number of roaming minutes per month, but I learned my freaking lesson, okay? Anyway, back to the phones themselves. As the phones progressed, we started to just see a lot more variety in them, variety in the shapes, the colors, different functions. There were just such a diverse array of phones, especially in my high school and like early college years, kind of like before we hit the BlackBerry days. And they also became just really easy to customize. I remember getting a phone in college, probably around 2007, I would say, 2006, 2007. And it came with multiple colored little faceplates that you could swap out, but it was basically just like a cover the way we change our phone covers now. It was super easy. I didn't have to expose the entire innards of the phone to swap it out like I did back in, 2002. And just as the physical phones got easier to customize, but also just more unique and like fun in general, we really doubled down on the uniqueness factor by taking the idea of customization a step further with custom ringtones and ring back tones. And really, this was peak cell phone culture to me. I mean, our phones were an extension of our personalities, not an extension of our bodies the way they are now, but an extension of our personalities the way that our MySpace profile was, or the way that our outfit maybe was. It represented us, to the outside world. Every single aspect of our phone experience was completely customized. Maybe you had a flip phone, like a pink Razor, or maybe a regular old flip phone with a little charm hanging off the antenna, or maybe it was pink, or maybe it was red. Maybe you had a slider phone, like the LG Chocolate, which was like such a status symbol phone for a minute. Maybe you had a freaking Sidekick. I wanted a Sidekick so bad. I'm still like the little teenager in me is still sort of jealous of people who had Sidekicks. But T-Mobile didn't work in my area. We weren't in the service area for it. I don't even think it existed in my area at all. And in those days, different phones were unique to their network. So when the Sidekick came out, you could only get it on T-Mobile. I even remember when the iPhone first launched, you could only get it on AT&T. So I never got a Sidekick, just like I had to wait a few years to get an iPhone because the phones were network exclusive. But in those days, there were so many options for phones. Even if I couldn't get a Sidekick, I could get any number of other really cool phones that came in a bunch of different colors and had a bunch of different functions. And then we would deck them out with everything that we could. We'd swap out the colors if it was an option. We'd add a little charm. Maybe we had like a custom case. And then we would select a ringtone. If you're too young to really know this, we not only used to leave the sound on our phones, like the ringers, on full blast on purpose at all times, but we actually paid money to download ringtones that would play when someone would call us, which we would answer because it was the 2000s. Ringtones were just little tiny pieces of songs that would play instead of the phone ringer. I remember specifically having the Sex and the City theme song as a ringtone in 2005. And you guys, I felt so chic and so mature for having that. I mean, I really thought that put me in like a different category. I was like, oh, I'm so cosmopolitan. How embarrassing. I also definitely had 1-2 Step as a ringtone. I mean, so many. And again, ladies and gentlemen, the theme, these ringtones cost money. They were not free. I think they were somewhere around like $1 to $2, maybe even $3 at the time. I don't know, but that's kind of a lot. And I remember when I discovered that you could assign special, unique ringtones to every single one of your contacts. And therefore, I decided that all of my friends should have their own unique ringtones. And here's what I thought was so cool. I would know who was calling without even having to look at the screen, because I would hear the ringtone. I don't even want to know how much I spent downloading a bunch of Sublime and Ludacris and 50 Cent and Incubus songs so that I could perfectly pair every single one of my friends with a ringtone that just captured their essence, captured their vibe so like specifically. But I mean, I'm guessing I got in trouble for that bill too. We'll just leave it at that. Some people took this even a step further with ringback tones, which, I mean, I still think that ringback tones are the most disrespectful thing ever. A ringback tone is a song that you could assign for callers to hear when they called you. So instead of just hearing the ringing tone as they're waiting for you to answer, every single person who called you was subjected to sit there and listen to whatever little tune you selected for your ringback tone. It was like a MySpace profile song, except you couldn't mute it. You couldn't turn the ringback tone off if you were the person calling. You just had to endure it. You had to sit there and listen to it. And parents hated these. I mean, older people in general hated them. Imagine your grandma calling you on your little cell phone in 2005, and instead of hearing the phone ringing like she had heard her entire life, she hears Chameleonaire singing about riding dirty. Like, it was unruly. Honestly, I will admit it now. It was unhinged. We should not go back to that. And around the time of the ringback tones and the ringtones and the sidekicks and all of the other cool, funky phones really started to change pretty quickly. I remember getting my first camera phone sometime in late high school, probably 2004 or 2005, and being, again, just blown away that it could take pictures. Never mind that the pictures were horrible. It felt so futuristic. Like, this tiny little device it has a camera, and we always called them camera phones. If someone was going to take a picture with their phone, we would say, oh, use your camera phone, because we had to have a way to differentiate between the phone and an actual camera, and also specify that this phone has a camera. It is also this other device. Then there was my LG Fusic phone from early college, probably around 2007, that was designed to also be an MP3 player. That was kind of the point of that phone. And it had this little round dial on the front that looked similar to the dial on the iPods of the time. And newer phones had internet capability, which honestly, I don't even think I messed with that until I got my BlackBerry. I think between the texting overages and the roaming situation and then the ringtones, I just couldn't risk another feature getting me grounded for running up a massive cell phone bill. But the phones started to change really rapidly, and they all had these various new functions. And it wasn't until I got my BlackBerry, I think, when these features all collided and I realized that my phone served as all of these multiple devices. It was when I got my BlackBerry that I started really relying on my phone for things other than just making calls and texting my friends. Because prior to that, I might have used my LG flip phone as an MP3 player in a pinch, but it wasn't my primary way to listen to music. But once I got my BlackBerry, she did everything. I would send emails from my BlackBerry. I'd take pictures. I'd be on the little BBM. I'd go on Facebook. I would tweet from my BlackBerry. I'd listen to music. And I didn't completely abandon my other devices. I know I didn't abandon my digital camera until probably about 2011 when I finally got an iPhone. BlackBerry camera was not very good. But it just wasn't as crucial to have all of these other devices with me at the same time because I had my BlackBerry. And now, fast forward to well over a decade later, and here we are. Our phones do everything for us. And I don't think that too many people would argue that maybe we're a little too reliant on the phones. So maybe there is something to a good old flip phone. Maybe we should all get a flip phone to take out with us instead of our smartphone, like those young girls who went viral on TikTok for being really excited to take flip phones out to the club instead of taking their iPhones. But for those of us who remember the real glory days of flip phones, I will wrap this up with a list of my top 5 ringtones for your flip phone in the 2000s. Number 5 is In the Club by 50 Cent. If you didn't get enough of this song, during every single Sweet 16 party for every single person that you went to high school with. It makes a perfect ringtone to remind you to party like it's your birthday every single time somebody calls you. Number 4 is Milkshake by Khalees. I literally, if I close my eyes, can still hear the tinny 2000s flip phone sound playing this song as it rang. I don't know if I had this as a ringtone or maybe one of my friends had it as a ringtone, but I can literally still hear the ringtone version of this. I don't know, but if you had this ringtone, I hope that you remembered to turn your ringer off at school or around your grandma, because they were not going to appreciate this one. Number 3 is Laffy Taffy by D4L. Before we had actual little pieces of songs that were the actual recording of the songs to use as ringtones, we had polyphonic ringtones, which were just the regular cell phone tones, but to the tune of pop songs. So they sounded kind of like video game sound effects. And I don't know, for some reason, I can still hear the notes of Laffy Taffy in my head as a polyphonic ringtone, like boom, boom, boom. It rings in my head. Either way, whether you had the real one or the polyphonic cell phone tone one, iconic ringtone of the time. Number 2 is California by Phantom Planet. I mean, this was the glory days of the OC. So whether you were a super fan of the television show The OC or you just thought you were a super cool surfer chick despite maybe living in the middle of the country and maybe having never surfed before in your life, this ringtone was peak 2000s. And number 1, Kiss Me Through the Phone by Soulja Boy. I mean, perfect ringtone to assign to your boyfriend or your crush if you wanted to be that girl. Iconic. And before I let you go, I am going to give you a little dose of millennial nostalgia ASMR because I have a few of my old phones here. If you're watching on video, you can see them, but if not, you can hear them and they all make such distinct sounds. So first we have a slider phone slamming shut and opening. So satisfying. It also has keys. I miss when phones had keys. Speaking of keys, the clicking of a BlackBerry keys. I literally used to sit in class texting under the desk, thinking no one could hear this. It's so loud. And then last, but probably most importantly, the sound of a flip phone slamming shut. So satisfying. So I hope you all enjoyed this episode. This was a fun one. If you did enjoy this episode, I always appreciate it if you share the episode or share the podcast with a friend who also might enjoy it. I will be back next week, so I will talk to you all then. Bye.